Hello friends, welcome back to Trenches of Parenthood. Today's topic, I love this topic. Okay, so this topic is navigating familial expectations when it comes to parenthood. Very excited about this topic. There were so many things I had to go through, so I'm very excited to dig in. Let's get started. So before we get started, on my first episode I did mention I'm from Ecuador. I don't remember if I mentioned my husband is from DR. So he's from Dominican Republic. I'm from Ecuador. We have some things that may be similar and some differences as well. The differences became very known when I had kids because I had expectations from both parts of my family. So I had like my husband's family and my family, and it was just sometimes it aligned and sometimes it was very different. So that's I think when I felt it the most. We're gonna go in layers. So right now I have toddlers. So I'm going to separate this into the baby stage and the toddler stage. I want to tell you everything I heard, everything I was consuming all the time, and how I dealt with everything that I was hearing that was putting a lot of judgment on me as a mom. And it definitely caused some like mental health disturbances throughout that period. But I want to tell you just how it went in general. So it was very common for when anything were to go wrong or whenever they thought that something was off or wrong in their views, they would give like suggestions or opinions, or they'll make comments. And I'm specifically talking about my mom and my husband's mom. I think they were the two that were the most vocal about these suggestions and comments and opinions. All of that I think turned into me internally just kind of judging my parenting and judging myself. And it was just a lot of pressure as well. One of the things I first remember hearing about, it was when I'd first been introduced to how babies have to have certain milestones. Such as rolling over or crawling or walking or talking at a certain month. My kids had very different timings. Sometimes it aligned with the expectations of the milestone, and sometimes it would be a little bit different. It would take a little longer or take a little less. It was just very different for both of my kids. With my daughter, I remember she didn't roll over at the start of 4 months, which I believe this is when the milestone is supposed to happen, at 4 months. My daughter didn't roll over at that time. And that became a really big concern for my mom and my mother-in-law. So they would always tell me like, oh, it's because you're not practicing with her enough. You're not helping her roll over. And so I was hearing a lot of like, you're not doing enough to get her to this milestone. And that is why she's not hitting the milestone. There was also another milestone that my daughter didn't hit right on the cusp. I had gone to the doctor, and the doctor told me, by this stage, she's supposed to have a certain amount of words. I came back and I was like kind of venting, and I was talking to my husband. I spoke to my mom and I was like, they told me I needed to have these amount of words for her. I don't think I have that many, maybe she'll pick it up later. And that was like, oh, maybe I should not have said that. My mom, because I told my mom first, my mom was like, oh, you don't talk to her enough. You need to talk to her more so she can get more words, She's definitely behind. Like, it's definitely not okay for her to be behind. And then soon after, my mother-in-law also heard the same thing, and she also gave me these same type of comments. So in terms of not hitting certain milestones, I think it was very common for my mom and my mother-in-law to be right on track. As in like, hey, you are not doing enough. And that is why they're not hitting their milestones. While I was having my daughter, because she was my first baby, I definitely took that harder than with Luca, for example. So I went through a stage of like, I didn't know how to handle that criticism and that judgment that I was feeling. And I felt like I wasn't doing enough. So with my daughter, I was like, oh my God, I have to talk more. So I started trying to talk more. I would start trying to do more with the playing, even though I was exhausted. I was trying to do more. Eventually, she learned the amount of words she was supposed to. Eventually, she rolled over. And with my son, That's when I finally learned that every kid learns at their own pace. They have their own timing. And just because it doesn't happen right at the start of that milestone, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. With my son, that went a lot smoother because I could take in these comments that I was hearing, because I was still hearing them at times. And whenever I heard them, I would simply reply and say, I'm going to wait on their timing. Their timing is perfect. I'm going to wait on them. And that was always my response, so I wouldn't have like anger towards any of the comments, because I think those comments can also be a little bit angering. So my response was always like, it's going to be at their time. I'm okay with it. Like, I'm okay if they didn't hit the milestone at that time. It's going to be at their time. And I also realized that they did back off once they realized that I was not worried about it and I was not paying mind to what they were saying. So it was a lot less with Luca than it was with my daughter. With my daughter, they might have also been just concerned because I was a first-time mom and they were just trying to help. But with my son, it went a lot smoother. They didn't have that many comments, and I do think that my responses contributed to them backing off a little bit in that area and just letting it be, which was also very helpful. The other thing, when they're a baby, they have a lot of times in where they may just cry a lot, or they sleep less, or they just have good days and bad days. And I think just like toddlers, that tends to happen. This happens, I think, in both stages. It happened more during the baby stage, but it also happens sometimes in the toddler stage. So whenever my baby was either crying a little bit too much or doing a little bit too much in comparison to what they typically did, my mom would always say, oh, that's like all the bad energy that they're attracting. And I've heard that before. That's a Hispanic thing. You hear the mal de ojo, and that's that thing. So my mom would always suggest me to do a cleanse with an egg. This was very common in my family. I got this done literally when I was young all the time. My mom did it with me every time. Like when I was sick, she'll do a cleanse with an egg. And by cleanse, typically what we do is that we take an egg, you put it all over your body, you rub it all over your body, typically in the places like the connections of your body. That's where you're supposed to rub it the most. And then you pray, asking for all the bad energies to leave your body and to go into the egg. After that, they crack the egg, they put it in water. You're not supposed to look at it. And then they throw it away and they flush it down the toilet to signify that they're now gone. My mom would tell me to do that a lot of the times. My husband thought I was crazy, which, I can see that. I understand, because they had never done that. And so my mother-in-law also thought, like, what are you guys talking about? Like, that's brujeria or something. I don't know. So that was the differences that we had. For me, I think I've always opted for just doing it because I don't see any harm in it. And I'm like, it's an egg. I'm praying. I'm not doing anything bad. So I think it's okay. So I've done it because I'm like, listen, just in case, you never know. Sometimes these traditions be working. So I do it. I definitely don't do it now. I think I did it more when she was a baby. And I think it was because I had so much stress that I was like, anything to make the stress go away. And so I did it a lot more often with that. My mother-in-law was big with the bracelets, the red bracelets that they have for the kids. And so my kids did not have a red bracelet because every red bracelet that I bought with a little eye typically didn't fit them. They were too big, and so it would always slide out. At some point, my mother-in-law found one. She would look for this everywhere. She found one. And so we put it on her, and at some point I think it broke. And so that was the other sign, when this breaks, it's like, you're getting a lot of bad energy. You need to do something about it or get another bracelet. Another bracelet didn't come through because we just didn't find it anymore. So that was a big push for my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law was really big on like, she should always be wearing that. She should always be wearing that bracelet. And if I don't put it, I'm going to allow bad energies to come in. And so that was one thing. And my mom was like, if you don't do the egg, she's going to keep swallowing all those bad energies. And that's going to be bad for her. And so, yeah, the way I received the messages I don't think they were the most positive. I feel like it always made me feel like I was a bad mom. Even though I wasn't, but it made me feel like that. In terms of the egg, like I said, I opted in for doing it, and just because I'm like, whatever, it is what it is. I don't think it's bad, and yeah, I'm totally for it. The bracelet also, I was like, same thing. If it's going to save me the stress, I don't care to have the bracelet. Like, go for it. Like, if you can find a bracelet, I'll put the bracelet on. No big deal. Now, if I didn't find a bracelet, I wasn't going to stress myself out. When it came to Luca, I think everybody put their guard down when Luca came. So the bracelet was not really too much of a push anymore. My mom didn't even mention the egg situation with my son. So that was weird. But that's how I dealt with it. I think there are certain things that I'm like, I'm going to pick my battles. I'm going to pick and choose. And I've learned that. I've learned to just pick and choose the battles I think are worth fighting. And those were just not anything I cared about to fight about. So, yeah. The other big one was baptism. So, my husband comes from a Catholic family. I come from a Christian family, and I say Christian because I think there's been different churches that have different names, and I'm just like, I don't know, to me, they're the same thing. I think my focus is just to learn about God and do as the Bible says. I don't care too much about like the title per se. And as long as I feel good in a place and I feel like I fit there, then that's what I'm going with. That's to say that Catholic and Christian, whatever church I pick, it's going to be a little different than Catholic. Typically, the churches that I have chosen, baptism is done at a later age. So typically, when you're a baby, you get introduced to God, they pray over the baby, and it's a way to say, guide them, so when they are older, they can choose you. And so then when they are older, that's when they choose to get baptized, and they say, yes, I accept, this is where I want to be, I accept God, I accept Jesus, and then they choose to get baptized. In the Catholic Church, they baptize when they're babies. And then they do like the communion. I think there's like a confession. I don't know too much on that one. Don't quote me on that one because I didn't go through all of that process, so I'm not quite sure how it is. My mom was actually, she used to be Catholic, and so I got baptized when I was young. So that's to say, my mother-in-law was very big on baptism. And she would push us every day to baptize our kids, or else they were going to be stranded and potentially they were going to go to hell. That was kind of the idea, the message that we had. It was like, if you don't baptize them, bad things are going to happen to them. My mom obviously didn't really care too much about it because now she's Christian, and so she is also with the idea of like presenting first and then baptism later. In terms of religion, every religion has something different. I respect every single one of them. And when it came to my kids, I just wanted to choose something that I felt good with. And I spoke to my husband to see how he felt about it. And he was also good with doing the introduction first and then the baptism later if they choose to. So I was okay with it. My husband was okay with it. We were happy with that choice. My husband, although they are Catholic, I think they're Catholic it's just like a family thing, but he never really went to Catholic school. Totally meant to say Catholic church. He was never really invested in Catholic school, so he didn't feel that attached to the Catholic traditions, and that's why I think he was more into I'm okay with this as well. But my mother-in-law really, really pushed us hard on that. So the pressure was very big because it was very constant. However, I think now they're a little bit more okay, we see how this goes. I think once we actually did the ceremony and they saw how it was, I think they felt calmer and they felt like, you know what, they're still being introduced to God, and I think they felt satisfied with it. So I think after the ceremony, every comment slowed down and it eventually phased away. The introduction actually happened when my son was already born for both of them. So we waited a lot longer for Avery because the godparents were not around. So the godparents actually lived a little bit further, and we just didn't find a time for it. So we waited a lot longer for Avery, and once my son was born, and my son I think was 1 when this little ceremony happened. So it was really nice because we got to do them with both of them. So that was beautiful. We loved it. It was awesome. And thankfully, after that happened, no one ever mentioned anything about the baptism. Throughout all these comments that I heard from my mother-in-law, I think my responses were always to reassure her that we were taking a good path because we were still going to be introducing our kids to God. And I think that was the fear. And so the reassuring of like, it may look a little different, but we're following a path that feels good for us. We're following a path that still aligns with the values that you have, and therefore, like, it's okay to do it in a different manner. The 2 things I did was to reassure that the values were still the same and that the decision was made between me and Jose. Everything else I tried to ignore, and it was a lot of repetition. Whenever I heard that comment, I would repeat the same thing over and over again. Thankfully, like I said, when the ceremony happened, everything phased out, and I have not heard about it ever since. The other thing that came alongside baptism a little bit, it was, so my son, this only happened with my son because of what I'm about to tell you. So my son was born with a very like sensitive nose. He has this little vein here. So you can actually, oh, it's like this actually. It crosses like this. It's a little vein that you can see. He's so white that you can literally see the vein very clearly. That was the reason why my son had a lot of nosebleeds, and he was just very sensitive to it. So every single time he was sick, he would bleed often. And he didn't bleed for a little bit. He bled for a lot of time. Me and Jose were always terrified whenever that happened. We didn't know how to act. We didn't know if we were doing the right thing. And those were very terrifying moments because they happened often and they took a really long time to get over. Eventually, we took them to the doctor, and the doctor said, hey, this is normal. This is not going to go on for forever. There's a time limit. Typically, this like eases down, I think, by age, I don't remember if they said 5 or 11, but it was still a long time. And so when they told us that, we were like, wait, we cannot do this for so long. This seems impossible. Like, he's going to bleed out. He's going to have anemia. Like, it's going to be so, like, we were panicked. They did tell us if this continues, we can send them to the ENT and then we can figure out the next steps. We eventually did go to the ENT. The ENT gave him a lotion, and that lotion did miracles. If the lotion didn't work, they do have a procedure to, they like do a little, they kind of burn it inside. So I don't know exactly what the process is, but they burn something inside so then it doesn't bleed out as often. Anyway, so that's the whole situation with my son's nose. My mother-in-law highly believed, and I don't know how true this is because I never got it to happen, so I'm not sure. But my mother-in-law always said, when she saw the vein, she said, the only way that's going to leave is if the godparents gift them a little key and a lock during their baptism, because it's supposed to signify that they have now unlocked the key and that's going to go away, or they've locked it or something like that. The point was that the godparents had to give him that key, and once they gift that to him, that will go away and it will stop and the bleeding will never come back again. And the key had to be made with copper. That had to be the material, copper. As I told you, we didn't go through any baptism, so that didn't really happen. Now, my kids do have godparents, as I told you, because in the ceremony we also we call them witnesses, but we call them godparents. I believe they call them witnesses, but they're really the godparents. Like, that's how we treat them. And I remember I actually asked, because at some point I was just so terrified. I was like, I'll do anything, it doesn't matter. So I went to ask the godmother, she's my friend. And so I told, like, I need a key and a lock. I need you to gift this to us. And she bought me one, but I didn't realize that it had to be copper. So she bought me one. like from Amazon, that was not pure copper. And so I went back to like my grandma. So I went back to my mother-in-law and I was like, look, we have the key. Perfect. Now it's going to be all good. And she was like, no, it's not, because it is not pure copper. By that point, I gave it up and I was like, I tried. That's when the whole lotion thing happened, and the lotion has worked miracles. And so now he does still get consistent like nosebleeds, but the nosebleeds don't last that long. And I have started also using a humidifier in his room, and that has also slowed them down a whole lot. Okay, the other thing that I was hearing so much when Avery was a baby. So Avery had like a lot of I want to say she was constipated a few times. Like there was one time and where she was crying and I knew it was because she could not do number 2. And I remember hugging her and crying with her because I had no clue what to do. I was trying to massage her belly. I was trying to give her prune juice. I was giving her all the things that you read online to give her. And, you know, eventually she did, and it was all good, and it was happy. But then I had a fear of like, oh my God, she's going to be constipated often. I don't know what to do. My mother-in-law would always tell me, you need to give her rice milk. It's basically when you boil rice, it's only a tiny bit of rice. You boil it with a lot of water, and then you blend it. And that becomes like the milk. And then you feed that to the baby. And that's supposed to be good for digestion. The issue was that she wanted us to feed that to her every day. They call it alimento. And I want to say it definitely looked filling. So I'm sure they would be full after eating that consistently, similar to milk. And it's something that she would say that she used that for all of their kids. She always gave it to them. And that's great. I mean, hey, that's awesome. I didn't feel comfortable giving that to my daughter every day. But the way I dealt with it is, first I looked into it. So I actually did research on it. When we did research on it, it did come up that it would be good for digestion. So I would pick like random days and I was like, I'm going to give you this today, and just kind of mix and match. But I would do it just like once a day, and I would do it in addition to the milk that she was drinking. So that's how I handled it. So whenever my mother-in-law would ask me, I was like, yeah, I gave it to her, but it was never in the consistent basis that she wanted me to. Because I read that it was good, I'm like, hey, we're going to try it. We're going to do it. Why not? And again, you know, I'm not a professional. I looked it up. That's what I found. That's what I went with. With my son never had that issue. So I don't think we did that with him. And also my mother-in-law was no longer caring about that neither. You can see the difference between the firstborn and the secondborn. With the firstborn, I got a lot of like comments, suggestions, things that I should be doing. Versus with my son, it was a lot more like, you got it, figure it out. So it was a little bit less, you know, they got a little bit more away in terms of that one. So that was nice. So that there's hope, you know, when you have multiple children, there's hope, because I think at some point they trust you that you probably know how to handle certain things. When you are a first-time mom or a parent, and if you've never dealt with kids before, I think that they just have a lot of concerns. And so there's a lot of comments, a lot of suggestions that get thrown at you, maybe not in the best way. And like I said, I think there's different ways to handle different scenarios. My biggest thing is just, you know, pick and choose the battle you're going to fight. And in terms of the constipation and the nose bleeding, my mom didn't really have any comments about that because that's not something that they really worried about in her culture. In terms of the nose bleeding, I used to nosebleed a lot when I was young. So my mom was like, yeah, he got that from you. You used to bleed all the time. And that's as much as she will comment on that. Now let's move on to the next one. So the next one was a big one. So the doctors here, when you have a baby, they will tell you the baby has to sleep facing up. My mother-in-law in her country, they would sleep facing down, like on their belly. My mom in her country, in Ecuador, they tell them to put the baby on the side. Different reasonings. The baby on the side is apparently so they don't choke. The baby on their belly, they sleep longer. And yeah, and then here they have like the statistics of like, hey, it is known that if they sleep facing up, then you have less of a risk for SIDS. So they all have their reasonings, and every culture has a very different way of approaching this. And so that's what I was hearing. I was hearing 3 different things, and that was a very overwhelming one because babies sleep all the time. So every time baby slept, I heard a new comment, either from my mom or my mother-in-law. Whenever I left the baby with my mother-in-law insisted on like, I have to put him facing down. When I left my babies with my mom, she insisted I have to put them on the side. And so my negotiation there with them was, if you want to make them sleep in a different way, it's okay, as long as you are very close by them so you can see if they're like breathing correctly and that they're okay. So whenever they helped me take care of the baby, I made sure that the time was not so lengthy because my heart was racing every time my baby was with them. I knew that I wanted to follow, doctor's orders because I was scared. So I'm just like, they're going to be sleeping facing up the whole time, 100%, no matter what. And so if they were with me in my house, I would tell them they have to sleep facing up no matter what you guys want. If I was leaving the baby with them, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to control what they were going to do. So the only thing I told them was like, I just want you guys to be really close by because I'm scared. That's all. It's okay, but you have to be close to them. That was my compromise. I wanted to make sure, they were helping me, and I wanted to make sure that they had comfortability taking care of my baby. And so I wanted to find a middle ground with them. That's the way I approached it. Funny enough, eventually the lack of sleep got to me really bad. So my daughter would wake up every hour or every 2 hours. So I never really slept. I was breastfeeding, so I was the only one that was up at night. And I think that got to me so bad at some point that I was just like, I don't care about any of this. I'm going to take my baby, put them close to me, and they're going to sleep with me so I can feel them breathe. I can feel everything about them. And if they want to drink milk, it's going to be a lot easier. To my surprise, when I put my baby closer to me, and like I was very cautious of how I slept. I left a lot of space. Like there was no blankets around. Like I was very cautious with how I put them near me. And I had my face also close to the baby. And I did this with both of my kids, with Avery and Luca. Now, I'm not recommending anyone to do this. Like if you choose to do this, do some research, do everything you need to do before you choose to go that route. For me, I opted for doing that, and it worked really well for me. Like I said, I was very cautious. And I also realized that when I did that, my kids did sleep a lot longer. So my daughter went from waking up every hour to waking up every 4 hours. And that was a huge thing for me. So when that happened and I woke up and I felt rested, I was like, yeah, I'm not going back. Now, that was another issue because I knew that, doctor was not going to be happy with that. I believe I shared that with doctor one time, and obviously they frowned upon it. I don't think I ever shared it again. To me, it was just like, I know I'm going to make the final decision regardless. And I think as long as I was comfortable with what I was doing and I was being cautious about it and I was sleeping more and I had my mental health back and restored, I think to me that worked the best. When my daughter was not sleeping, I really, really struggled with my mental health. And so to me, I was a no-brainer. And eventually, when they were both able to roll over, and then I stopped hearing so many comments because by then they could sleep with their belly down or sideways or however they wanted to. So that was the nice thing. I knew that as they grew older, the comments about that were going to decrease, and they did. So that was great. With my second born, there were times in where I would make him sleep like belly down, but again, I was always literally right next to him because he always refused to sleep facing up. Like, it was really bad. He really would not want to sleep at all. Like, he would last probably 30 minutes sleeping if it was facing up. And when you turned him over, he would stay sleeping for like 3 hours. And so it was a balance on there. So with him, I did like facing up whenever we were sleeping at nighttime together, because I would wrap him. And he was okay with that. But during the daytime, he didn't like to be wrapped. Every time in the daytime, he would just fight it off, and he just didn't want to be there. And if I did get him to sleep, it would be for like 30 minutes. And so a lot of the times I would switch back and forth between putting him facing up and sometimes putting him on his stomach and then just being close to him. So again, I was very scared, very cautious of everything I was doing. But that's how I approached it with my second-born and my firstborn. I think in general, parenthood is just so full of criticism. And I learned with time that you were always going to have critics. No matter how well of a job you did, there was always going to be a problem. You were never going to be able to satisfy everyone. And so I learned to make a choice, pick my battles, and let the world criticize me. As long as I was happy, my kids were happy and taken care of, my husband was also on the same page, and nothing else really mattered. And I think I urge that for every parent that's dealing with any type of criticism. Like, you are doing a wonderful job. Doesn't matter how good you do it, there's always going to be someone. Always. You just have to stay your ground. Look out for you and your family. And everything else is just noise. At some point, you learn to block out the noise. Another fun one that happened. So my daughter, she had her little belly button a little bit out. And I had asked the doctor if that was normal. And they said, yeah, it's normal. It's going to go away. I think also by age 5. I don't remember too much what they said. My mom, the tradition from my mom was you needed a piece of fabric, thin fabric, and you had to wrap them around with that fabric and then tie it so the belly gets pushed in. And they're supposed to be with that basically all the time. My mother-in-law said that you should be putting a quarter onto the belly button and then wrapping them around. They both said wrapping around. So I was like, okay, well, there's got to be something there. I can try it. I tried it for a few times. One time I had to take my daughter to the doctor for her regular checkups. And I remember I was like, I don't want to get criticized. So I took away the quarter, I took away the wrap, I took everything away before going to the appointment. I go into the appointment and the doctor is like, oh yeah, she's doing great. She looks awesome. Belly button is healing perfect. And she was like, there's a lot of talk about the belly button being like out. Some people suggest like wrapping it. Some people suggest to put a quarter on there. She's like, you don't need to do any of that, okay? None of that is going to do anything. So, if you ever hear that, don't do it. And it was funny because I was like, oh my God, did she watch me do this? Like, how did she know this? But I think after that, because I had a targeted comment of like, you do not have to do this, that gave me a little like signal of like, it's going to be okay. You're just hearing stuff and you're just working with whatever you're hearing, but it's going to be okay if you don't do that. And so what I chose to do is that I would do the wrapping. I stopped with the quarter because I was like, that seems kind of weird to put like copper on the belly button while it's healing. So I don't know. I was questionable about that one. So I took the quarter away. I never did that again. And in terms of the wrapping, I did that sometimes because I was like, who knows? Listen, I'm scared. I don't know. We'll do it. So we did it a few times here and there. I was not consistent with it. It was more like whenever I remembered. For my son, that didn't happen. His belly button never really got out. So I never heard any comments on that with my son. That was the baby stage. That was a lot. And that's only the things I remember. Let's go to the toddler stage. So toddler stage, that's the stage where I am now. And I still hear about this so much. Okay, a really big one is food. Okay. Hispanics and their food is a big thing. Okay. So for my mother-in-law, for it to be considered a meal, it has to involve some type of rice. And typically it should not be dry rice. So that's, you have to have the beans on the side. And if they eat that, then they're okay. My mom didn't have a specific meal per se that they needed to have, as long as they ate something. The big thing was when it came to portions and when it came to making them try food. So I was really big on, I want them to try it. I want them to enjoy the process of like the food. I want them to have fun with it. And if they don't like it the first time, it's okay. I want to keep introducing to them. Like I want to, try. I looked into so many, like, the baby weaning, I think it's called. Like I try so many different ways so I can incorporate different foods in there. And I never want it to be anything forceful. I want it to be more of like, I want you to try it. I'm going to present it. And then we're going to keep trying until you try it and you like it, hopefully at some point. That was not their idea. Okay. That to them sounded like I was a terrible parent because I was not feeding them. And I was accepting that whenever they didn't want to eat, I would allow them to not eat. And that was a problem to them. So my mother-in-law, if they served a plate to them, the expectation was for them to finish that. And my expectation was I want them to eat until they're full. Once they're full, I don't want them to keep eating. And so that was a big push. Now, because I was really big on that, I always like kind of stood my ground on that one. Although it affected me to hear so many comments sometimes, I had to go against that every time. So whenever they would feed them something and my kids would be like, no more. And they were like, oh, here, one more. Or like, here, I'll give you candy if you eat one more. I would always have to say, they said they don't want any more. They're not going to eat anymore. Whenever the candy suggestion happened, at times I would point out and be like, you don't have to offer them candy to eat. Like candy is just, it's a snack. Like I don't want it to be like this glorious thing that they're looking for and that is why they eat. Granted, I know it's sugar. They're going to like it, but I didn't want it to be treated as a prize. I just wanted it to be treated as another food item. And so that was a tricky one. And I think even now, it's a little tricky. I think my mother-in-law has not lost the habit of offering candies for one more spoon. But we have gotten to a good place in terms of they now do listen whenever, like if my daughter says, I don't want any more, they typically do listen. Sometimes they'll try like, hey, if you eat one more, I'll give you candy. And she may eat one or two more spoons, but if she doesn't want to eat, she will actually stop. So it's helpful to know that they will listen. It's a little harsh to work with the times when they keep insisting, but it has gotten a lot better. So it's progress and I'm okay with what I'm seeing now. So I get habits. The habits are hard to change. And if you've been doing that your whole life, it's going to be very hard to change it in general. So I try to give people grace as much as possible because I know that they came from that type of background. That's what they dealt with. That's what they know. And so that's what they're going to do. So I try to hopefully find a compromise and always set some type of ground of what's like the priority. What's the important thing that I want to make sure that I'm communicating. And to me my priority was, as long as you listen when they say they don't want any more, we can work with the other things in a slower pacing. So that was that. My mom is very similar. So my mom also grew up with that same mentality. And so with her, I also had to set the same expectations of like, no, if they don't want, they don't want. But I think, again, same thing. She sometimes also has the same habit of like, we have to eat everything so we can eat a snack. So it's a little different framing, but it's very similar idea of like, well, if you eat, you get a snack. So when I am around them, of course, I try to model what I want them to do. So I try to, if she says no, I stop no. If someone makes a comment about a candy, I will tell them, no, we won't be having any candy. We're done with food. Maybe we'll have a snack later, or depending on whatever we're deciding. Sometimes they may offer candy and then they don't actually give the candy. And that's another no for me. And so when that happens, I would actually tell them like, if you're going to offer something, make sure you have it, because they believe what you're saying. So I would typically make that comment like, If you don't have it, please don't make that comment. And so there's just like little things where I would make a comment on. But yeah, that's how I dealt with it. I think that's an issue even now. There's always something. I just have to stay my ground. This is what I want. And the rest, I'll make comments here and there and try to work with whatever I'm seeing. If there are certain times where I'm like, hey, she's going to give them like a holes, like the candy, the holes after they eat, I'm like, that's fine. It's, you know what? It's okay. I'll deal with it. It's fine. I'm not against my kids having candy. I'm not against my kids having snacks. I just don't want the food to be this huge different thing in comparison to like snacks and candy, because I don't want this to be treated as like the reward for eating something. I want it to be like, this is just food and that's it. And it's okay to have candy. It's okay to have food, but we have to just make sure that we're eating well all around, and that we're not eating just because we want a piece of candy. We're eating because this is what makes us strong. We're eating because we're enjoying that time together. Like, I want the purpose behind it to be different. So that's what we're like aiming for. But it's a constant back and forth with that one. I think in general, we knew that there were going to be times in where the kids would stay alone with grandma and granddad. So we knew that there were some expectations that may be broken because, you know, they're the grandparents. So setting that priority and sticking to that one priority and pushing for that, I think, was a big thing. Just to kind of know and set the tone of like, okay, you know what? This is like a non-negotiable. All the other ones, you know, we can work through them, because we also didn't want them to lie to us and tell us something that they're doing something just to make us happy, but they're really not. That was the other place where we were trying to prevent. We want them to be honest with us. We want them to feel comfortable telling us something. So we wanted to also make sure that we were not saying no to all of their habits, because that is very hard to change. And so that was the other things that we kept in mind. When it comes to food, I think we got a lot of labels. The big label we got was that we were just not good parents because we were not feeding them. I think that was the label, that we were not feeding them. And of course we were feeding them. We were giving them, you know, they had their regular meals, they have their 3 meals, they had their snacks, they had all this food, but we did it in a different manner. That was all. And we listened whenever they didn't want to eat. So it was different. And I think because it was different and because they didn't know how to react to it, their reaction was, they're not feeding them. And that's a label that was very harsh, but we knew that we were doing literally our best when it came to food, and that we knew that they were eating. We were happy with that. And I think for that one, the person that got the most influence was my husband. And I can understand that because he was raised also, you know, with those type of values and those type of expectations when it came to food. So my husband, I think, would be the one that would be more worried. And so he'll be like, oh my God, maybe she is too skinny. You know, maybe she's not eating enough. And so I think we always had to reconvene of like, what does she eat? What it's okay? What's not okay? We had to do some research to figure out like what's normal, what's not normal in toddler behavior when it came to eating. And I think that always helped. Looking into research and then evaluating what are we doing? How does that compare to how a toddler is supposed to react to food? How a toddler just works with food? And so that helped a lot. There's some Instagram pages also that really helped ease that and calm that. And so I think that was a constant thing that we had to talk through, because there was a big impact, I think, on my husband in that side. I think now it's become less of an issue because my daughter eats everything. You still hear the labels of like, oh my gosh, she's so skinny. And for those, I always try to answer them with like, it's her body type. She's great. She's eating well. She's strong. She's healthy. She's good. And so I would try to always answer with something along those lines. We're not worried about food anymore. They both eat well. We're happy. We've gotten a rhythm of it. You know, and those labels do appear here and there still from people. And so I know that I'm not going to stop hearing them. But because I have trust in what we're doing with them in terms of food, and because they're responding well, and because they're happy, and because their weight is great, I'm not worried about it. Neither is my husband. So we just let all the comments slide now. There was one time, this one was a little funny. So there was one time when we wanted to take the bottle away from Luca. Luca was a little harder to let go of the bottle. Avery let it go on her own. Luca wanted the bottle a lot more. And so at some point we were like, we want to take it away. The dentist has suggested for us to start transitioning him because his teeth could get messed up if he were to sleep with the milk at nighttime. And so we decided, it's time to take the bottle away. He was eating well anyway, so we're like, we're going to switch out to just food, no milk. My mother-in-law almost had a heart attack when that started happening. She just didn't want Luca without milk. She thought this is the only thing holding him. Like, if you guys don't feed them. And so that was a really big thing. She wanted to hide the bottle. And thankfully, we only had one bottle. There were no more bottles in the house. So if that bottle was missing, there was nothing else. So that was the solution. We had one bottle. No one could hide anything. We did as we wanted. There was another thing that happened. It's like when my daughter started learning how to walk, one of her legs was kind of tilted in. And the suggestion was she should have one, like a heavy boot, so she can learn how to walk straight. I asked the doctor. The doctor said, no, you don't need it. That's also going to go away. It just depends on how she developed in the womb. And so I think by age 6, I think they're supposed to be fine with that again. And that was a big thing that was my mom and my mother-in-law that they both agreed with that. And because I was confident with, like, I never worried about that. To me, I was just like, that doesn't seem so bad. I think she's okay. And because I didn't care about it, thankfully, although I was hearing that, it didn't really affect me as much. I just told them, don't worry about it. She's going to figure it out. She's going to be fine. And so I never got the boot. I ignored that comment. But I was still hearing it. Again, at some point, I kind of learned to disregard some comments and just make it noise and just kind of block the noise on there. There were a few other things, like when they're sick, they both had their own medicine that I was supposed to be giving. So my mother-in-law suggested that I should always give them honey with pineapple. That was the thing. And because I didn't have that in my fridge every time, my kids were probably going to be sick forever. That was her idea. So she would prepare that for us at times. And I think whenever she prepared it, I gave it to them. At times my husband would prepare it. I was not really consistent with that because it wasn't a habit for me. But I give it to them here and there because to me, I'm like, it's fine. It's pineapple and honey. I mean, it's okay. That was a battle that I was like, I really don't mind. It was a lot of sugar, so I just make sure I give them a little bit, and that's it. My mom did this other remedy that was with onions, garlic, honey, lemon, radishes. I think that was it. I used to drink this all the time, and honestly, it was my favorite medicine from home all the time. And so I was okay doing that too, because I'm like, that tastes good. There's all those ingredients sound great. I'm okay with that too. So that was just like, we're hearing these suggestions, but the reason why I'm mentioning them is because when we heard the suggestions, it didn't feel positive, because it was always like, you don't do this, therefore they're going to get sick more. You're not taking care of them enough. That's why they're getting sick. You're not making medicine for them. And I think that's where the negative things came. There were like a lot of good things that came out of these comments and suggestions, but I think the way that they were given didn't have a good tone. It didn't have a good vibe with me, so it didn't do what it was supposed to do, because I think it, rather than helping me, it put stress on me and it put judgment on me. That's how we're going to end. The one thing you want to get out of this is that every kid is different. You're doing a good job. Different things work for different people. Do what you think is best. Do your research. Stick with your gut, and everything else will fall into its place. Critics are going to criticize. That's going to happen at all times, no matter how good of a job you're doing. So expect them, and at some point, you'll learn to block the noise. It was great talking to you guys today. I hope this gave you ideas. I hope this gave you some type of also hope if you're going through one of these harsh stages of just criticism. Know that you're doing great. Your baby loves you. There are different ways to parent. There are different approaches to everything. So you're going to be great. Trust yourself. You got this. And I'll see you next time. Bye.